There is a word written next to your ancestor's name in the ledger. Not their surname, not the estate. A different word, in a column most people have never looked at, and it is the name of the nation they were taken from. Coromantee, Eboe, Congo, Nago, Papaw, Mandingo. Those aren't guesses. They aren't DNA estimates. They are words a clerk wrote down in Jamaica 200 years ago, because the men buying human beings wanted to know exactly what they were buying. 7 nations, 20 surnames, and the parishes that connect them. Let's be precise, because this is where most channels start lying to you. Your surname does not tell you your nation. It never did. It came from an estate, and the estate came from the man who owned it. We've covered that in every video on this channel. But your surname tells you the parish. And the parish tells you what the estates there were buying, from which ports, in which decades. Because those estates bought from the same coast for generations at a time. So the chain is name to parish, parish to port, port to nation. 3 steps, every one of them written down. None of them invented. Here's what most people never got told. When the 1817 registration law came in, every enslaver in Jamaica had to record every person they held. Name, age, and whether that person was African-born or Creole, meaning born on the island. And in the records of that era, over and over, you find something extra. Plantation books, inventories, runaway advertisements, estate lists. They name the nation. The words they used were the trading terms of the period, and each one maps onto a real people. Coromantee meant Akan, the Gold Coast, modern Ghana, named after the fort at Coromantee. Eboe meant Eboe, the Niger Delta, the ports at Bonny and Old Calabar. Congo meant Congo and the peoples of the Congo River Basin. Nago meant Yoruba. Papaw meant Fawn and Iwe, from the Bight of Benin. Mandingo meant Mandinka, from Senegambia. Moko meant the Cross River peoples, Ibibio and Efik. The planters were not being respectful. They were classifying stock. They wrote entire manuals about which nation made the best field workers and which ones fought back. And in doing that, they left behind the single most specific record of African origin that exists anywhere in the Americas. They kept the receipts. Every time. 7 nations, counting down, smallest presence in Jamaica to largest. Stay for number 2, because that nation has a reputation in the Jamaican record that says far more about the people writing than the people written about. And number 1 is the nation that shows up behind almost every single uprising in this island's history. The Maroon Wars, 1760, 1831. And the planters knew it, kept buying anyway, and could not stop themselves. Before we start, comment your surname and your parish. Parish is the key to this entire video. 2 people with the same surname on opposite ends of this island are looking at completely different nations, 1,500 kilometers apart on the African coast. And if you know your family's estate or district, Content, Retreat, Newmarket, 9 Mile, Catadupa, give me that instead. That's the strongest coordinate there is. All right, 7 down to 1. 7, Mandingo, Mandinka, Senegambia, Surnames, Fraser, Tulloch. We start with the smallest presence and the one that surprises people most. Mandingo, in the Jamaican record, meant Mandinka, from Senegambia, the far northwest of the trade, the Senegal and Gambia rivers. And here is what the planters wrote about them in their own documents, that they were often literate, not in English, in Arabic. Mandinka society had been Muslim for centuries and had a scholarly tradition attached to it. There are documented cases in the Caribbean and North America of enslaved men writing in Arabic, and Jamaica has its own examples in the record. Fraser and Tulloch are both Scottish Highland names, and they concentrate in the western and southern parishes, where the Senegambian share was small but real. Think about that clerk's position. He is writing down a man as property, and the man can write in a script the clerk cannot read, from a tradition older than the clerk's own church. 6. Moko, Eboe and Efik. Cross River. Surnames, notice. Swaby Moko meant the peoples of the Cross River, Eboe, Efik, and their neighbors, shipped out through Old Calabar. Old Calabar was one of the busiest ports in the entire Atlantic trade, and its records are unusually complete because the traders there kept correspondence in English with Liverpool merchants for decades. Notice and Swaby are two of the most distinctly Jamaican surnames in existence. You will struggle to find either in any volume outside this island and its diaspora, which makes them exactly the kind of name the registers can actually follow. They sit in the eastern parishes, St. Thomas and Portland, and the east is Calabar country. The Cross River region also produced Ekpi, a graded society that governed trade and law across dozens of communities. That system crossed the Atlantic and survives in Cuba as Abacua. What crossed to Jamaica took different forms, but it came off the same ships. 5. Papaw, Fawn, and Ewe. Bight of Benin. Surnames, Osbourne, Rhoden. Papaw, sometimes written Popo, meant the Fawn and Ewe peoples of the Bight of Benin, modern Benin and Togo. That coast was controlled for much of the 18th century by the Kingdom of Dahomey, a highly centralized state with a standing army that included a corps of women soldiers the French would fight and lose to more than a century later. In Jamaica, the Papaw share sits highest in Portland, on the wet northeast coast, where the estates were small and the mountains steep. Portland is also nanny country. The Windward Maroons held those mountains under a woman commander and forced a British treaty in 1739. I'm not going to draw you a straight line between those two facts, but they're both in the record, and they're in the same parish. 4. Nago, Yoruba, Bight of Benin. Surnames, Francis. Samuels, Nago meant Yoruba, and the Yoruba arrived in Jamaica later than most, heavily in the final decades of the trade, and, crucially, after it was banned, through liberated Africans landed by the Royal Navy in the 1840s. That timing matters enormously. Because they came late, they came in more concentrated groups, and they arrived when Jamaica already had free villages and free communities to enter. The result is that Yoruba practice survived in Jamaica with unusual clarity in drumming traditions, in kumina, and related practices in the East, and in language. Behind them stood the Oyo Empire, a Yoruba cavalry power that at its height controlled more territory than England, with a capital, a council that could depose its own king, and a professional army. Francis and Samuels are English origin names, common across the eastern and central parishes. Ordinary names sitting on top of an empire. 3. Congo, Congo and Mbundu, West Central Africa. Surnames, Green. Robinson, Wright, Congo, in the Jamaican record, meant the peoples of the Congo River Basin, Congo, Mbundu, and their neighbors. West Central Africa was the single largest source region of the entire Atlantic trade. In Jamaica, the share rises sharply in the later decades as demand outgrew what the Gold Coast could supply, and it lands heaviest in Clarendon and St. Catherine. The Central Plain, the biggest estates, the clearest shipping records in the whole archive. Green, Robinson, and Wright are three of the most common surnames in Jamaica, and all three concentrate through that belt. And the Kingdom of Congo is where the story about primitive Africa collapses entirely. Congo converted to Christianity in 1491, before Columbus sailed, by diplomacy, not conquest. It had a royal court, correspondence in Portuguese, and ambassadors resident in Lisbon and in Rome. In 1526, its king, Afonso I, wrote to the King of Portugal describing merchants seizing his people, including nobles of his own family, and asked him to stop it. That letter is in the Portuguese National Archive. It has been sitting in a European filing system for 500 years. 2. Eboe, Eboe, Bite of Biafra. Surnames: Henry, Patterson. Spence, number 2. Eboe meant Igbo from the Niger Delta, through Bonny and Old Calabar. Igbo people arrived in Jamaica in enormous numbers, concentrated in the eastern parishes, St. Thomas, St. Mary, and the later North Coast. And Henry, Patterson, and Spence all cluster through that side of the island. Now here's why this one is at number 2. The planters wrote about Igbo people constantly, and what they wrote was that they were melancholy, that they were prone to despair, that they took their own lives at rates that damaged the investment. That is what is in the documents. Read it again and notice what it actually describes. It is a record of people who refused, kept by the people they were refusing. The planters could see it happening, wrote it down as a defect in the merchandise, and never once wrote down what it meant. Igbo society was decentralized, no single king, and that was read as an absence of government. It wasn't. It was the kingdom of Nri and its priest kings holding religious authority across a wide region, and the Aro Confederacy coordinating trade across hundreds of miles through negotiation rather than conquest. Authority without a throne. The clerks had no column for it. 1. Coromanti, Akan, Gold Coast, Surnames: Sharpe, Jarrett, Haughton, Hibbert, Wynter, Sterling, and number 1. Coromantee, named for the fort at Coromantee on the Gold Coast, meant Akan, Ashanti, Fante, and the peoples of the states around them. Modern Ghana. This is the largest single stream into Jamaica, and it is overwhelming in the west. Westmoreland, Hanover, Trelawney, St. James, and down into St. Elizabeth. Sharpe, Jarrett, Haughton, Hibbert, Wynter and Sterling all sit across that western belt. And now, look at what happened there. 1739, the British signed treaties with the Leeward and Windward Maroons because they cannot win. 1760, the rising that begins in St. Mary under a Fante man the records call Tacky Burns longest and hardest in Westmoreland. 1776, a conspiracy uncovered in Hanover, organized across multiple estates. 1795, the Second Maroon War in Trelawney, ending with the Maroons deported to Nova Scotia, and then to Sierra Leone. And 1831, Christmas, St. James. A Baptist deacon named Samuel Sharpe organizes what is meant to be a peaceful general strike. Around 60,000 people, the largest uprising in the history of the British Caribbean. Sharpe is hanged in the square at Montego Bay in May 1832. 14 months later, Parliament passes the Abolition Act. Every one of those events happened in the parishes buying hardest through the Gold Coast forts. In the decades they were buying hardest. And the planters knew. They wrote it down. There are Jamaican documents openly discussing whether to stop buying Coromantee because of the risk. And they kept buying because the same qualities that made those people dangerous made them, in the planters' accounting, valuable. Akan states were organized around a military structure with defined ranks and a chain of command. The planters imported that. Then they put thousands of them on adjoining properties and expressed surprise for 100 years. That's the thing nobody tells you about these records. Every line was written by someone who thought they were doing bookkeeping. The nation column exists because a buyer wanted to know what he was getting. Not one word of it was meant for us. And it is the only reason any of this is recoverable. The system that tried to make your family anonymous wrote down their nation by name in a ledger and filed it. So no, I can't tell you your surname makes you Haughton or Eboe or Congo. Nobody can, and anybody who tells you otherwise is selling you something. What I can tell you is that your surname gives you the parish. The parish gives you the port, and the port has a name. And that name is a nation with a history, a government, and an archive, whether or not the man holding the pen thought so. Comment your surname, your parish, your district. Everything in this video turns on it. They wrote down the word. They just never expected anybody in your family to learn to read it.